Hello and welcome to Aspiring Leadership, Making the Move into Leadership. Each week, we'll be chatting with various leaders from all different walks of life, learning from their experiences and sharing their advice. It's the perfect podcast for somebody wishing to step into a new leadership role or for a leader who's already there, wishing to continue their development. Please like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. Happy Thursday, everybody, and you're very welcome along to this week's podcast, another episode of Aspiring Leadership, Making the Move into Leadership. So as always, hope you've had a great week and you're enjoying your summer. Some of you may be on vacation at the moment and some others may have some things planned. I'm heading away for 2 weeks myself at the end of the month, so looking forward to that and some well-earned downtime. I'm sure you're all, even though we're not going a whole lot of places, it can be mentally challenging to stay focused and engaged without that variety in your life, and being at home all the time. It's nice to have a little bit of variety and a break and some downtime, of course, which is always important. So thanks a million to last week's guest, a thoroughly enjoyable episode with Celine Williams. And if you wish, you can listen back to it, and of course you can reach out to her through her social media and her website. All the details are in the podcast as well. She's on LinkedIn and she's also on Facebook too. So this week's coaching question is a really simple question that I would use all the time in my coaching sessions. And the question is, what would you do differently if you could do it again? But just to think about the question specifically in relation to the last year and the pandemic since last March, and so many of us may have used the year wisely, and so many other things we could have possibly done differently throughout the year, given the fact we had a little bit more time. And the question is if you could do the whole 18 months again or so, what would you do differently? Perhaps there's lots of things you might have stopped doing or started doing, or little tweaks you could have made. Maybe it was in business and your own development. And it's only really now that you realize that you had that chance to do them. So yeah, have a reflect over that question. I've been thinking about it myself over the last couple of days, and it's brought up some insightful things for myself. So yeah, the question is again very, very simple, powerful coaching question. What if you could do the last 18 months again, what would you do differently? And it's a brilliant way to deliver feedback to somebody, because I would find 9 times out of 10 when I ask somebody after a presentation or something, when they're asking for feedback, I say, well, what did you do well? They will tell me the 3 or 4 things that they do well, and normally they're the exact same things I can see that they do well. And then I'd ask them what would they do differently, and 9 times out of 10 they agree with exactly some of the areas that I feel they could do differently. And it doesn't make it as personal, and it means that it's not focusing on something they can't control anymore, because that moment is gone. But what it does is it gives them the opportunity to think forward, so feed forward, and what would they use in the future if they got the opportunity to do it again. All right, so that's the coaching question. We're going to get on to this week's guest, and this week's guest is a guy called Greg Ballard, another one of my guests from across the water who I came across on LinkedIn. So, intriguing interview, an intriguing background, as you'll hear. Used to be part of a church, got involved in coaching from there, and then decided he wanted to set up his own coaching organization and consultative business. So has a phenomenal story from his own leadership perspective and how he learned it, but then shares his 5C philosophy and loads of other great learnings. And I also had a really nice chat with him off air too, that I took some great learnings from myself, which I'm trying to implement in my day to day. So happy listening, and enjoy the chat. Hey Greg, how's things? Thanks a million for joining the podcast. You're my second guest from the US, so I appreciate that you've made the long journey across the Atlantic to join us today. Maybe to kick things off, we'll get straight into it. You've had a very varied background, so maybe you'd like to tell us a little bit about it.
Excellent. Funnel, thank you for having me. Really glad to be here with you today and with your guests. So some of the background. So, you mentioned this, you noticed that I come from a ministry background. Okay. So before I was doing what I'm doing now, my main source of income was I worked in a large multi-site church. And what brought me from there to here? Some great question. What I'll tell you about is the person that hired me and brought me in at a senior staff level. He approached and developed me in my leadership capacity in a fairly unique way. Now, I had had a number of mentors and leaders in past roles that give me lots of opportunity. But it was very much a sink swim kind of thing. And this wasn't necessarily different, but from that. But what he approached me with was coaching. He approached me with some of these basic coaching principles before I even knew what they were. In fact, after about 2 years, we started talking about this. And because of the context we're in, and again, multi site church, so we had thousands of people attending our services. And if any of your guests are in the church world space, that is generally a leadership factory at that size, because you're going to grow on your edges. You're going to grow on the fringe. And the key to growth is identifying talent, finding a spark, and then developing that, pouring gasoline on a spark, getting some flame, and helping an individual kind of build their own network of people and become a leader. And so that was the space we were in. And so we realized that this idea, this coaching modality, this coaching method was really effective in developing leaders. And it worked really well with me. It worked well with some of my peers. So we went through an official coaching program, not enough to necessarily become certified or hang on a shingle, but enough to become familiar with the concepts. And immediately I took to it. And immediately I began using it with my staff, with volunteer leaders I worked with, and with people that came to me with pastoral questions. And for 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, I used those skills. And the coaching became kind of something we did as an organization. And I remember having this thought one day, hey, if I'm not doing this anymore, I'm likely going to go into this leadership development coaching space. And well, a few years after having that thought, it was time to transition from our role. And so my wife and our 2 kids, we relocated. We came to a whole new area of the country, and I started a coaching business. And after about 4 years, I had built up some clientele, I built up some reputation, and I've got a better understanding of the work that I'm doing and I want to do. So we pivoted in early 2020 into consulting. And so we're a consulting firm with a coaching background, and that's how we approach our work now.
Mm-hmm. What were some of the key learnings you took when you moved from what I'd imagine was somewhat a structured environment to having to work on your own as a leader?
That was an interesting process. I had built a couple companies prior, small stuff, but I'd done it. And I am the kind of person that kind of likes to dive in head first. And so that's what I did. It took me, we had a plan, right? We moved here, we had a plan. It took about 6 weeks to realize that plan was not going to be executed. So we had to go back and create a new plan. And within a few months, I had a business model, and I just went out I just started showing up at meetings and saying, hey, my name is Greg, and here's what I'm looking to do. And I went through several iterations of that before attracting clients. And so it was really, for me, it was all about just going out and doing it over and over and over again. And now today, about 5 years in, I have a pretty substantial network in this region.
Well done, because that's the most challenging part of any role, isn't it? Any sales role, leadership role is that facing rejection and continuously doing it over and over again. But as I mentioned to you briefly before we were chatting, the 2 key things which are similar to most other leaders. Well, number one, you had a clear plan there. But number 2, you're prepared to take that risk and move sideways in your career so you could then move forward. Tell me, what is 5C Consulting?
So we're a boutique consulting firm. We focus on people and strategy. And particularly, what is your people strategy inside an organization? And we offer a number of different services, if you will, but talent strategy, organizational change, IO development, change management. And we've started, as we've added some other expertise on our team, to step into kind of more of the HR support work. So we're really all about the people inside your organization and how are you helping them, row together in the same direction at the same time and actually enjoy it. And we can approach from the individual one-to-one space. We can come in and work with a specific team, or we can come in and work with the entire organization. And one of the things we're talking a lot about now is how are organizations managing change, and how are they becoming more adaptable and versatile in response to market demands. And so we have some pretty unique methodologies and strategies to help these organizations really manage their change, measure their change, and increase their adaptability.
What are some of the key things that organizations need to stay on top of to ensure any change that they're going through is successful?
So the first thing we like to do is change can't be done for change's sake. So we have to be able to articulate and tie a change initiative, a strategic change. So you think, this is a big critical strategic initiative that you want to take, and be able to take that and communicate it to everybody in the organization in a way they're going to understand and relate to it. So it's not, well, because so and so said so, or because the policy says so. It's got to be translated and communicated in a way that the person on the front lines can say, yeah, that makes sense to me. I can actually get behind that change, and I can start looking at how my behavior impacts this strategy. The second thing we want to do is we want to be able to measure how change is working, how it's the behavior. Okay. How do you capture individual behavioral change at an organizational level? And that's a space that we have some technology and methodologies to do.
Okay, so it's number one, ensuring that at an individual level they're connected to the wider strategic objective, and then being able to measure the effectiveness of the change going forward.
Yeah, so it comes down to top down versus bottom up. Mm-hmm. So if you are a leader and you're telling everybody, you need to become more safe. I want you to behave safe. And, a lot of times people are like, okay, we should be safe, but I don't like this guy's attitude. I don't like the way I'm being told, and I'm exaggerating the message, right? Whereas if we say, listen, our strategy to win this market is to reduce injuries, to lower our costs, and to become the safest work environment in our industry, in our market. And we need you to come along with us. Now, that messaging can really shift people to say, well, yeah, I don't want to get hurt. I don't want my friends to get hurt. And yeah, we can do more better things in the market if we are a safer organization. Now you've inspired them to say, how do I become a safe employee? And then we can say, okay, well, here's the behaviors we need you to do. And then we can start saying, okay, we're going to pick one behavior you want to work on over the next 30 days. And let's measure that. And that's how generally we'll take the approach.
Okay, makes good sense. In relation to that then too, Greg, you've been lucky enough throughout your career to work with so many different organizations and teams. From your perspective, what is the difference between like a high performing team, an averagely performing team, and a low performing team?
Excellent question. There's a lot of factors there. What I'll say, that a high performing team is constantly looking to get better. Number one, they can't settle for their last season scores. Okay. So they are constantly pressing their own envelope and looking to get better. And so if you have people on your team that are always, hey, okay, my productivity is here, which is good, but I need to get better. And in many cases, they're like looking for 1 to 5% tweaks. How can I just get a 5% advantage out of this process? That would be one of the first things I'd highlight. Another thing I'd highlight is High performing teams, they own it. They own all their stuff. So they have established a self awareness and a maturity where they can say, you know what, I didn't complete what I agreed to do, and therefore that's why this failed. And so there's a trust, a vulnerability based trust, as opposed to a predictability based trust, and in the sense that they can take ownership of something that they contributed to that didn't work, um, and then they can go and fix it. Now, conversely, if you look at a team where you have people that are not able, whether they lack the awareness or they lack the humility and vulnerability to say that was my fault, but instead they blame shift and they move the responsibility off of themselves onto something or someone else, that's where you get a mediocre or a poor team. So those are a couple of the things that I would distinguish between high performing and low performing teams.
What are some key things a leader can do in that instance to maybe move their team from average to high performing?
So there's some easy things to do that can be done very quickly by moving team by swapping out team members, right? You can find a low performer and you celebrate a separation, or you can and bring in a high performer. Or if you want to go through the harder path, which sometimes is the more fruitful one, is to identify in a particular direct report. So say we're working with one individual. What is that person's goals? What do they want to achieve? What drives them? What's the inherent motivation for them? And then how can that be tied to a business goal? Okay, so let's make up an example here. Say you have right now a mediocre performer, but then after some investigation and some research, you discover a little bit more about them, and that what they really want to be doing is they really want to be on the creative end of things. And right now they're on the technical end of things. So they're not loving the work, but they don't have a huge track record on the creative side either. But they have a desire to do that. Well, what we can do is we can explore with them. Hey, okay, so you want to become one of the creatives in our operation, and right now those spaces are filled, and we don't see a ton of history, past performance for you there. But that doesn't mean the door is closed. Well, what I need you to do is I need you to really carry the weight on your job. And when I get an opportunity, even if it's of a small thing, I will pitch to you a creative opportunity. I will position you to get some build a track record here. But I need you to do the role you're in, and you need to be really successful at that. And in that way, you can basically take their personal interest, their motivation, and say, look, I want to help you. I want to position you to get what you want, but you still got to do what needs to be done. And through those conversations, what we do is we look for alignment between an employee's, personal professional interest with a business interest. And they're almost always there. You just got to learn how to dig for them. But at the moment you realize there is none, okay, what this person wants and what they're going after, I can't provide them experience or skill development to achieve it. Then you have a different conversation with them to say, listen, your goals, where you want to go is fantastic, and I'd love to support you. But this role that we have you in right now doesn't give you any experience or to help you develop any of the skills that are going to get you to that goal. How do we get you into a position where you're going to be able to move towards your goal? What do we have to do? And that point, this person has to decide, am I on the right team? What team do I need to go to? And so that's one particular strategy I like to teach leaders and managers in improving the performance of their team. Now, there's a lot of other things you can do with skill development around communication, around productivity, around prioritization as well, and they will all help improve overall performance.
Mhm. That's similar in many regards to the strategy around the change management as well. But it's actually, it takes a lot of courage as a leader to hold your hand up, or ask somebody a challenging coaching question which moves them away from your team, because inherently we all want to save people, don't we? But when we're a leader and we have them on our team.
And honestly, I think if leaders would embrace the idea that people are going to cycle through
Mm.
more than not, we can actually, if we can shift the mindset of the leader to build an alumni network of people that they've mentored, they'll have a much greater impact. And I've mentored, I counted a few years ago, I've mentored personally over 220, 30 people. And that was when I counted that a couple of years back. At this point, that number is growing, continues to grow. And whenever I mentor someone, to me, it's always like, hey, this is a relationship and this is for a period of time. I don't look at this as I'm going to mentor you for my end of days. Now, if that happens, fantastic. But I'm not looking at it. I'm going to help you in this particular phase of your life, of your journey. And I'm going to try to pour in as much value as I can for you right now. And when we celebrate a separation for whatever reason, my hope is that I've given you some really high value that you'll go and take and share and use for the rest of your career and your life. And you'll have fond memories of the investment I've made in you as you go out in your journey. And if executives and leaders can kind of take that on, what they end up building is they build an alumni network of really effective people that go out into the market, go around the world, and do good things. And to me, that is a huge win.
And then they'll speak positively about you, and I'm sure that will come back to you. I love your mindset in relation to celebrating that parting, because often, as I said, that can be viewed negatively. Tell me, I'm a relatively new leader, and um, been learning a lot recently about the interview process and trying to become better at interviewing people, because it's so challenging to try and make a decision within an hour, interview someone, and then you're aware of all the biases that you may or may not have, and is there a bit of meritocracy going on here, or is this person really good, or am I just hiring in the likelihood of me? But what are some things that are important to hire for today as well as for tomorrow?
So you picked up on that, I think, in one of our profiles. We have a particular tool and process that allows us to gain insight on a candidate so that we can not just hire for this current role, but for the future roles that they may take as well. And this comes back to, again, corporate strategy. Okay. What are you trying to accomplish in your hiring and selection process? Are you looking to find people that are going to do one job for the next 5, 10, or 15 years? If so, then we need a strategy to fulfill that. However, if you are a startup or a young company and you're like, hey, I want to hire some people that are going to become our EVPs in 5 to 10 years. And that skill set is very different. Someone that's going to move straight up the leadership ladder is going to take a different candidate than someone that's going to do an IC or a supervisory role for the next 10 years. Two completely different candidates. And the tool we use measures cognitive ability, it measures behavior, it measures interests, and then we supplement it with some other assessments as well. And so what we can do is we can get a really clear picture of a candidate's makeup, okay, how they're structured, what jobs they will be able to do and what they'll be able to be effective at. And we can run their statistics, their stats against standardized role performance models for the roles. And we can see, hey, they're going to crush it as a contributor. But as a manager, they're not necessarily going to perform very well. And as a director, they're not going to perform very well. Or we can see, based on our reporting, we can see, hey, they're they're going to be okay as a contributor. They're going to come in, they're going to be okay. But as soon as we put them into a people management role, we're going to see they're going to have stronger alignment. And so essentially, we have the ability to assess what someone's capabilities will be over about a 5 to 7 year window. And so that means we can now we can help organizations get beyond hiring for today and get into hiring for today and tomorrow.
So you're looking much deeper. You're looking into the actual makeup of the person, which is usually powerful. Curious to know a little bit more about that at a high level. What are some of the key attributes that are different between, let's say, a very valuable IC versus somebody who you feel could progress into that management role?
So there are a couple things. So let me talk about how our mind is made up, our brain. We're going to carve it into 3 sections. We've got a cognitive side, which is our intellect and our knowledge, right? And then we have an affective side, which is kind of the emotive and the personality side. And then we have a conative side. And each of these sections have a significant factor in this. And so our cognitive ability, that can be measured through an IQ assessment. It can be tested based on your educational requirements or certifications, any professional things that you've performed and demonstrated that you have the knowledge, right? Because when you're hiring, you want people to know they need to know something, they need to be able to do something, and you want them to feel a certain way in order to complete their role. So you've got the cognitive piece, and we measure that because we know that there are certain jobs that require a certain level of cognitive ability. And in some cases, you can actually be on the far end of the spectrum where you're in the top 10 or 2% of intelligence, right? But if we put you in a role that only requires a slightly below average to average, well, then your competency level, your cognitive ability is not matched with the role, and you're not going to enjoy it. Okay. And vice versa. If your cognitive ability is at the average level, but we're putting you in a role that demands it be at the top 5 or 2% of the population, you're going to be drowning. And so that's what we do at the cognitive side. And cognitive, we break that down into numeric ability, numeric reasoning, verbal ability, verbal reasoning, and an overall composite score. The next one is affective. So personality. In a hiring selection process, we don't ever assess the affective side, the personality side, because anybody can do any personality style can do any job. And it doesn't measure skill. It doesn't measure ability. And so depending on what nation you're in, what country you're in, there are some laws against hiring people based on personality. And I never recommend it. We don't use any tools or assessments that are measuring the affective side in a selection process. That's a fantastic tool to use in your onboarding, not in your selection. Now, the third one is the conative. And there's a tool we use to measure that. And this is kind of your MO. What will you do and what won't you do? So some people are what we call quick starts, and they kind of dive in and they solve a problem kind of head first. I'm a quick start. There are other people that are really forensic researchers, and they're going to approach a problem by getting more information. And without going through the whole model, I mean, this is measuring how you will do something, how you will approach a problem. And it tells us what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. And so with this insight, we can assess an individual candidate. And then we can look at a pre-made performance model for a role. So if we have an outside sales position, we know that someone with these cognitive scores in this band is highly successful. Someone with these behavioral attributes is very successful. And so we have a model of what success looks like for this role. And it can be any role. I'm just using outside sales as an example. Then we take the candidate scores, we do an overlay, and we see where they match, where there's maybe some deviance. And then in the interview process, we can kind of take it the next step further to determine if this is a candidate that we want to bring in.
Okay, very interesting. I'm surprised by the personality piece, because there's so much emphasis on EQ. I suppose that would be somewhat tied to a person's personality, and then a lot of organizations put emphasis on, would you be prepared to sit beside this person for 40 hours a week, and obviously that's tied to personality in some regards.
Yes, yeah. So EQ and personality they're not exactly the same. So
Right.
personality assessments are going to be your DISC assessments, your MBTI assessments. I think Enneagram, I'm not sure, maybe also personality based. There's a lot of affective assessments out there, and they're measuring personality. Emotional EQ is slightly different. At this point, I wouldn't put it in a hiring process. There are ways you can test it through interview questions and kind of just looking at their resume and kind of understanding what they've done before. The interesting thing about EQ is it can change. You can develop that. Okay, your cognitive ability is static. Your MO, how you operate, is static. So what we're measuring in our selection process are things that don't typically change in who you are, and yet they have a significant impact on your capability in the workplace.
Okay, very interesting. Really interesting stuff. You mentioned as well, or you speak a little bit about some of the work you guys do between turning teams from teams where there might be conflict to collaboration. From a leadership perspective as well, what are some things leaders can do to help drive that kind of culture, or create that kind of culture rather?
Vulnerability. So we'll just start there.
Yeah, explain that word. It's thrown around a lot.
Yeah. So vulnerability-based trust versus predictability-based trust. So a lot of times, if you've been put into leadership and you haven't been trained or equipped in people management, then you've got the deck stacked against you, and you have an ego, you have an expectation on you to perform, right? And if there's any lack of competence, you end up putting up a front. And this creates this insincere, style of leadership, this very defensive style of leadership or management, and it sets you up to fail. And honestly, I don't even blame the people that are in these positions. I blame the people that hired them and put them there, or the system that allowed them to get there. And it's really unfortunate because it creates a real problem for everybody else. Okay. And it takes a lot to be able to say, I need help. I don't know what I'm doing when you're in that role. The first thing you got to do is you got to assess where you are in your capabilities as a people manager. Very different than capability in your technical capability. You may know exactly what needs to happen in a technical situation. You may have some very strong hard skills, which is fantastic. Don't dismiss and don't discredit yourself for those. But we need to start by acknowledging that our people management and our soft skills need development. And if you can get to the point and say, hey, look, I need some development, and then you can go along and find that. You can get coaching, you can get training, you can get mentorship. There's lots of resources out there where to get that. That is going to be the foundation. And it's going to also shift you to be able to say, I can own my own humanity. All right. People lead people. There is no one that is not human leading people, right? So humanize yourself. There's nothing wrong with that. Your direct reports want a human leader. They want somebody that, can say, hey, look, my crap stinks too, and can take ownership of when they drop the ball. Now, that doesn't mean they want you to go out and hang out at the bar with them and, share all the dirty laundry. That's not what they're looking for. They just simply want you to acknowledge that you're not perfect and that you can make an error and that you can correct it. The other thing is that they need clarity. People need clarity of role. Get clear on what needs to happen, and depending on the people you're managing, because again, we're talking to a very broad audience here.
Mm.
Some people need very detailed direction, and some people need very broad direction. And so your job as a manager is to get to know your people and understand what they need to succeed. What level of definition do they need? How are they going to be measured on their performance? What level of freedom and autonomy do they need, if any, or if completely? What do they need to keep them engaged? Okay, your job as a people manager is to understand your people and how to get the most out of them. That is your number one job. I think in a previous podcast, there was a conversation between management and leadership, and they are such a distinct difference. And I approach them as two completely separate skill sets. Yet we want to see them in all of our people, right? We want to see them manage well and lead well, but we have to break them apart. And management is this one-to-one relationship over a specific process that you continue. This process is maintained. A leadership is about moving a group of people from one place to another. It's about persuading people that may disagree with you that where you're going is a good direction, and bringing them along without alienating them. And so leadership is all about change. It's about the future, while management is about the present and maintaining a process. And in management, you need these tight one-to-one relationships with your direct reports so you can set them up to succeed. And so those are a couple things I would start with. I would add on to that basic critical thinking. How do you assess a problem using critical objective thought and structure, data and logic, so that a solution you're presenting is not about your personality, is not about your pet project or your special interest. It's about observably objective information that everybody on your team can see and critique. And it's not tied to your personality or your interest, but just the actual problem that needs to be solved. So critical thinking skills is one. Communication is another. Learning how to communicate. A good example of this is if you have someone that has 100% of the solution in their mind, okay, smart person. They have all of the solution. They figured it out, but they can only communicate 10% of it. Versus someone that has half of the solution, but can communicate all of it. You want the person that can communicate all of what they know, not 10% of what they know. Because you could have the whole solution, but if you can't communicate it, it's worthless. So communication is another key thing we have to get in here. So managing relationships, critical thinking, communication, prioritization is huge. Being able to say, look, we're going to do this, we're not going to do that, and moving forward on it. Prioritization is a big deal. And I could keep going, but there's a few nuts and bolts for you.
That's super advice. And like that, you mentioned it there about the leadership and moving people from point A to point B, and trying to manage that then from a process perspective. Like that's always the challenge, isn't it, to maintain those relationships in a cordial way, but also bring the people for you. I've asked this question loads of times on the podcast, but it intrigues me. There's so much written and there's so much training, and you're speaking so much sense there. What's the reason that so many of us, and I'm going to include myself in this because there's so much that I don't do as a new leader, are getting so much of this wrong, and from your perspective?
Okay, I'm going to bring up dieting first. Okay, we can all relate to the dieting industry, right? There's I don't know, 2-3 dozen standardized diets in the market, and yet, if you want to go on a diet, you pick one. Pick the Atkins diet. Okay, you're going to eat a lot of carbohydrates. You pick the keto diet. You're going to eat a lot of this. Get the pescatarian diet. You're going to eat. Okay, so there's all these different models. In leadership, the same thing exists. There's all these different models and programs, but they're very confusing. And when somebody steps into them and they don't get a result, they wonder, okay, it must be me. I must be the problem. I had a huge insight into this a couple of years ago. I started working with a couple of health coaches, and I still do work with them. We've partnered together. I've learned a ton. But I went through their initial assessment, and I met with my coach, and she recommended. She said, "Hey, Greg, if you're open to it, I'd like to get a health DNA assessment for you." I was like, "You can do that?" And she said, "Yes, they're not the ancestry ones, and they don't, So we took a look at it. I went through the process. I'll get to the point here real quick. What came back was this 24-page report that it was literally my genetic code and how my DNA impacts my health. And I got some good news. I got some interesting information, and I got some stuff that I got to take care of, right? And what I realized is I have to look at my genetic design, and I have to make a diet that matches my genetic design and my goals. And what I find, and I'm going to translate this back into leadership, what I find is a lot of times managers and leaders are going out for these very broad, overarching programs and plans, and they're not effective because they haven't been personalized and they haven't been aligned with your strategy and your goals. And so that would be why what I'd say to do. One is you got to get really clear on who you are, how you're wired, and then you have to figure out where you want to go with that. And then you have to really design a very customized plan to achieve it, which is one of the reasons we've opened up a highly specialized development program for executive leaders to do just that.
Tell me, as we come to the end of the chat, and I could genuinely talk to you all day, Greg, how can anybody who wants to work with you and maybe take part in that development program get in touch?
So they could reach out to me directly by email, which is my name, Greg at 5C, Five letter C, dot consulting. And so you can reach me, Greg at 5C.consulting, or you can reach out to my team, concierge at 5C.consulting. And if you're interested to chat, take a look at our website, 5C.consulting, and we'll have a conversation. And if there's something we can do with you guys, that would be fantastic.
Brilliant. And just one or two last quick questions. You've obviously developed yourself an incredible amount since you, as a pastor, began to learn about coaching and leverage that and then move into your own organization. But what are some key resources that have stuck with you that you might recommend to other people from a learning perspective?
One, don't stop. You've got to get up every day and try new things. If you get caught in comfortability and comfort, you're going to stay there, and it's going to be really difficult to learn and grow. So one of my professors told me this, and in ministry training, and it still exists, it's true, is there is no growth in comfort, and there is no comfort in growth. So embrace the discomfort, do new things, identify someone you look up to and respect as a mentor. And I'm going to put mentors and coaches and consultants are all very different modalities and relationships. A mentor to me is someone that is they've climbed the mountain and they're open to telling you about their journey and to give you guidance as you are trying to climb the same mountain. Or they can navigate the industry. They know the players, they know the terrain, and they can be a really good guide for you. I would identify key mentors. For me, I've had a number of them, coaches, consultants, past supervisors and managers as well. I'm an avid reader. I can't list all the books I've read, but Crucial Conversations is one of my
Great
top
book.
ones.
Yeah.
And I'll just stick with one, right? Crucial Conversations is a phenomenal resource. But I probably I don't know how many books I go through a year, but I read quite a bit. So those are a couple things I would suggest. If you really want to move and accelerate the process, find a coach, someone that an executive coach, an executive mentor, someone that you can meet with on a regular basis, someone that has tools and strategies and is going to help you really navigate specific processes. Now, a mentor may have the time, but likely won't have the time. If you can't, usually a mentor you're going to meet with maybe once a month, maybe once or twice, maybe once every 2 months, and it's kind of a relationship, right? A trained coach that you hire and you pay and you invest in is going to be there every week, every other week, and they're going to be adding value and pouring value into you, and it's specifically for you. So you got to gauge what level of commitment and what level of investment you want to make, but those are some starting points.
Brilliant. So a mentor, if possible, someone that'll help you navigate and it's done it already. Continue to read, step out of your comfort zone, and then, where possible, to invest in a coach. And last question for today: where do you see it all evolving to in the next 10 years or so? How do you see the role of a leader evolve?
Wow, that's a good question. I have not been asked that. So what I'm seeing today is the demand for a very agile and adaptable person. So the trend right now is someone that can make effective decisions. So really strong business judgment. And I think this is going to continue to increase because as the resources and information and data gets easier to access, the expectation on executives to get it right is going to, I think, I'm going to predict will continue to increase. So you want to make good choices and develop a track record of good decisions. Now, that said, there's a lot learned when you fail, right? There's a lot learned. And so you identify the lessons if you make an error and be able to articulate those. The other side of it is the humanity piece. There is a huge trend right now in connecting with people human to human. And one of our 5 C's and our 5 practices is we are consciously human. And so, and in our values, we say we practice both intellectual and cultural humility. And so that to me captures this empathy, this awareness, this social awareness of what other people's backgrounds, other people's contribution, and being able to talk to people in a way that respects them and gives them dignity. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to agree with them or do what they're suggesting, because you may be in a position where you have to make a final call, but it does mean that we have to treat people well and they should feel good about the interactions we've had with them. There's no reason to tear people down. There is no reason to make people feel bad, and that takes a lot of emotional intelligence. So that's another big trend I would see. And then the third one that I'll predict is managing change, being able to manage the speed and rate of change that is coming. A couple of years ago, I was at a conference and the keynote was talking about, and he said, "Hey, look, think about the last 5 years." And when was this? This might have been 2017. And he said, think about everything that's changed in the last 5 years. And when you think about it, like, well, wow, things are changing pretty quickly, right? And he said that's the slowest it will ever be again. And that hit me. That hit me. And I think change is exponentially going to continue to increase. And it's at a point where it's really difficult for people to process the level of change and the intensity of that change that's happening. And so I think that's going to be a key attribute for leaders going forward, is managing the change process and being able to adapt to whatever comes in the market.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge, and it's, as you said, it's there all the time, every day, every week. There's consistent change, and being on top of it is a challenge. Really enjoyed the interview, Greg. I think a couple of big takeaways from me, and I'm just thinking about my own leadership style as well, is to try and move away from that vanilla, one size fits all, and be more individualistic with what you do as a leader. That's usually important, and then effective from everything from change management to motivation, from high performing teams to mediocre teams. The interview piece is also fascinating, and the in-depth analysis that you guys do, which then from my perspective anyways, I could only imagine has such a positive impact on the candidates that you select, because I'm thinking about my own interview process that I execute at the moment. It's so superficial in comparison, it's very, very surface level orientated. And then just to finish up there, it's that continuous learning, step out of your comfort zone. There's some of the key takeaways for me.
Yeah, fantastic. Connell, this has been a, a wonderful conversation and time. I really appreciate you having me here, and thank you.
You're more than welcome, and honestly, it was my pleasure. It's so great to have guests on, and I've said this on numerous occasions. It's you that make the podcast, and it takes a huge amount of vulnerability and courage for anybody to step up and put your hand up and share your views. So I genuinely appreciate it.
Thank you. Pleasure. My pleasure.
All right, have a good evening. Stuff there from Greg. I really, really enjoyed that chat, and hope you did too. As I said at the end of the piece, if you do want to reach out to him, you can contact him through his social media, and he'll get back to you. A really nice all around guy. So be back next week with another guest. Hope you have a great week, and remember, whatever you're doing, get involved.